Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy and on behalf of the American University in Cairo to this Tahrir dialogue number 44. I see that you're here in good numbers, so I hope that, and I'm sure that we'll enjoy the discussion, the presentations, and the discussion. You're all most welcome. I'd like to welcome particularly my good friend, Ambassador Jorge Alvarez from Mexico and Mrs. Alvarez. The subject today is important per se, is important as such, and it is important for the community living in Cairo, and it's important for Egypt as much as it is for the country which is the subject of this dialogue, namely Sudan. The subject is the conflict in Sudan, framework for peaceful settlement and regional repercussions. If we talk about peaceful settlements, then we'll have to talk about the dispute or disputes that require settlement. For the disputes and for the settlements, we will listen to good friends, to social scientists, not only Sudanese, but brilliant social scientists. My good friends, Dr. Ibrahim Noor, Professor of Political Science and future chair of the Department of Political Science at the American University in Cairo. The second speaker, who will speak first, is Dr. Hamid Ali. My good friend, Dr. Ali, is Associate Professor of Public Policy and the Chair of the Public Policy and Administration Department at the American University in Cairo, School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. The conflict and the disputes of Sudan may be seen as very specific, very particular to Sudan. The crises in Sudan have been recurring since its independence in 1956. Crisis after crisis make a problem. A crisis cannot be permanent, but a problem may be permanent. A problem of governance, a problem of ruling the country, but also a problem of national integration in Sudan. Problem of national integration that has resulted in the separation of a good part of the country that was the largest country in Africa, is no longer the largest country in Africa after the secession of South Sudan. But the problems of national integration in Sudan do not stop there. There are other problems of national integration, and there are other threats to the territorial integrity of Sudan. These may be seen as very specific problems to Sudan, but they also may be seen as African problems. The problems of governance, of ruling, are pervasive in the African continent. Problems of territorial integrity are pervasive in the African territory. They are due to a great extent to the borders that were inherited from colonialism. Many countries, most countries on the African continent, were the creation, and their borders were the artificial creations of former colonial powers. The problems are similar in many countries in Africa, and probably what we saw, what we witnessed, the dismemberment of Sudan may bode ill, in fact, for the African continent that had committed in 1963 to respecting the borders inherited from colonialism. 1963, at the time the Organization of African Unity came about. Again, I think we are fortunate to be listening this evening to Dr. Ibrahim Noor and to Dr. Hamid Ali. I only try to say a few words to introduce the subject, but they know much better, they know much more than I do about the question that is ours this evening. First, Dr. Hamid Ali will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, after which Dr. Ibrahim Noor will speak for another 15 to 20 minutes. I may be discussing, only maybe, discuss some of the questions that they raise, after which the floor will be open for the audience to raise questions, to make comments, and to interact with our two speakers. Thank you very much again for being here, and the floor is given to Dr. Hamid Ali.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim Noor and Dr. Ibrahim Awad, for being here today with us. And here it is. In my brief statements, I will be focusing on, my argument will be focusing on Sudan on 4 tracks. One of the reasons that I will look at it is the causes of the crisis, and then I will talk about how the conflict will be settled. And if you look at the causes of the crisis, there are 2 elements that I will be focusing on it, and one of those is the nature of the Sudanese state. Because the state is the colonial legacy, and its legitimacy was emanated from the coercions and the use of power and the use of force. This formula has created a disastrous outcome that is resulted in the separation of South. Then the second part is I will be viewing the role of the elites, especially the political class, and their failure to keep the state's alignment with the society and to promote the general social welfare. And then later on, I'll talk about the framework for peaceful settlement and its implications. First, if you look at the nature of the Sudanese states, Sudanese state is not only a weak state, but it is a fierce state, masquerading its weakness by using excessive force. And the coercion to the Sudanese citizen, it became very, very clear with the number of wars for the years that the country went through it. And the other thing is the Sudan boundaries are artificially demarcated by the colonials. The identity of who are the Sudanese was not clearly defined, and it never been a part of the national dialogue. And in the earlier days, the Southerners has raised this issue of who are we as the Sudanese. And that was never been answered. And once they demand another device to redefine that character, they called for Federation of Sudan. The argument was no federation for one nation. Not only that, they jump to the bandwagon of the pan-Arabisms at the expense of the pan-Africanism, where the Sudan can easily reconcile between those 2 paradigms and live together. So, the state that was founded on the basis of coercion and the use of force always require force to legitimize its existence. And I consider Sudan is not a nation state, it's a nations, the plural, is a nation states. And that's become a question that is, people are struggling through it. It leads not only to question the legitimacy of the state, but also people are using force to undermine the same states. So the majority of the Sudanese people are calling for restructuring the states with the new mechanisms to provide a public goods and flexibility to ratify its existence, to ratify its mandate when it's needed. That something was quite absent. So, what is important is that any peace agreement that must reconfigure these states, the nature of this state, reformulate the institution of the states to serve the student, not the corrupt institution and bureaucracy. And there should be a clear separation of powers. There should be a clear separation between the political parties. The relations that intertwine with the military institution ought to be cleared. The state must be not only federal state in a political sense, but it's supposed to be also fiscal states to have a full federation. The other comment that I will make is about the elites. Sudanese elites, I call that the ruling class. I consider them as a minority from a certain geographical area. Their ultimate goal was to control and dominate the state apparatus for economic gains. And I'll be more particular about these elites. And also for the translation, people on the translation, I will use this concept, call it the elites as the Riverians, or the Riverians elite. I mean, النخب النيلية. Okay, this is a concept that I'll use pretty much. Call it Riverians. This is the people that are living on the river band. My good friend Dr. Ibrahim Noor is a Riverian for that sense. The other one, I call them the quasi-Riverian. And the quasi-Riverian, I call them, this is my own concept, I call them النخب المتنيلة. And this is also, I use it to redefine and separate between the Riverian and the quasi-Riverians. Okay. So if you look at the Riverians, they are living in Khartoum. Okay? They care about Khartoum, not the rest. They look for the clean water in Khartoum, better education system in Khartoum, but they don't care about the rest of Sudan, whether that's the north, whether that's east, whether that's west. And in a quest to maintain their power, these Riverian elites, they used different ideological tactics. That is diametrically, you look at it from socialism up to the Islamism. This dimension was filled, and it became that is a political tactics and the game they play to govern at every time. At the expense of the aspiration of the majority of the people of Sudan that who are living on the margins, who are the majority. There is a subclass, second subclass of the elites. This is what I call the quasi-Riverians. These are the elites from the margin and who are the subservient to the elites as the Riverians. And they are very honestly served, and they become the natural extension to protect the interests of the Riverians. And this group did so much damage to the margins, the groups on the margins, by cohooting and by getting together with the Riverians to undermine the legitimate causes of the people at the margins. And the important thing is also, if you look at the behavior of the elites on the north, it's the same behavior of the elites in the south today that they cause this ongoing civil war. Because they all care about their own interest and how they are gaining their economic interest at the expense of all. So the coalition of the Riverians prevent not only the natural growth of the states and the empowerment of the states, but also fail to maintain the equilibrium between the state, society, and the economy. So the state become a subject of the elites. They possess it, they own it, they confiscated the rights of the other citizens. So the Sudanese state, with its current border, it is a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religion. It is a state of nations with a deep cultural, social denominators in some part of it. So far, it was so weakened and it was torn by the behavior and the conduct of the elites in Sudan. And one of the examples of the Riverians elites, for example, in 1956, this is the Sudan's independence, there was about 800 positions in the civil servant at that time. All these positions are taken by the Riverian elites. Only 6 positions, it went to South and to Kurdufan. This is another state, and the rest of the state didn't receive anything. So in other words, the structure of the bureaucracy of the federal government inherently, it is defects. Inherently, it has problems that has resulted into the patterns of the development and skewed the development patterns and allocation of resources to the general society. Another example is from 1958 to 2003. Sudan has received about $13 billion on endowments and the grants and aid from the international community. All of it went to a triangle. This triangle has been named under the name of Hamdi's triangle. He was the former finance minister who said that the planning should be focused on this triangle, which is again the Riverian triangle. And this has created lots of problems later on to Sudan. So the Riverian elites not only monopolize the state's instruments, but also use it viciously to destroy the social fabrics and undermine the legitimate cause of other groups. Okay? Though they kept rotating the positions among themselves, using different tactics. The dangers of the current regime of Sudan, the President al-Bashir, the state became an instrument of the social transformative instrument that tried to transform society and create new social class at the expense of everyone, even including some elements of the Riverians in the triangle. And the most dangerous one is they created these wars, and they felt that these wars are essential to keep serene in power. Al-Bashir will never be in power for 20 years and plus without wars. He will never be in power if there was any peaceful institution in the country. Okay? So, now we are in a phase that is the lasting peace cannot be realized without these elites should have the desire and willingness to give up some of their shares, to give part of this pie that they are enjoying it for the last 60 years. So that is, other elements in Sudanese society also could be part of it, and that requires reconfiguration of the current states. The other one that is important is there must be a dialogue, because the wars are very costly in terms of the humans. It undermines so much about the future generations of Sudan. So the dialogue between the elites and among the elites on how to govern Sudan. This should be an entry point. The yearning for the unity of Sudan and the dreadfulness from the disintegration of the country also should be a matter of concerns. That is, we cannot, whether you are on the center or on the margins, we cannot sustain that this war to continue and the suffering of the people to continue. It took too long. And most important is we must respect the human rights. And that requires that we should call for the ceasefire. And today's the discussion in Khartoum is people talking about the freedom of press, but to me the most important is the ceasefire, because people are dying while the others are looking for the freedom of press. And again, still the problem of Sudan in Khartoum and the political class that in Khartoum is a very old political class. I call it political geriatrics, very old political class, 80 years and above. They are driving the future of this nation. That ought to be stopped. The other one that is important about this state, that how they are careless about their lives, how they are careless about their future. The war in Darfur itself, in the last 10 years, it cost about $50 billion. It's about $5 billion per year were being spent on fire. While the entire country is spent on education and health about $500 million. So this trade-off is showing that there is no future for a country in that being spending on the war machines. The argument before the last is about the framework for peaceful settlement. If we want to have a peaceful settlement, peace, this is a must. Okay. One thing that is, the dialogue so far is centered around Khartoum. And later on, they want to call upon the people on the margins, especially the SRF, to come later on the stage to be part of that dialogue. And I see the opposite should be started for. They should allow those to take the lead in the discussion process and own the process rather than being invited as a guest. Because if we do that, we're going to reproduce the same crisis that we are in. Because you create a framework, you invite the others, still you are on the control, on the driving seat, while the other will be annexed to the process, which is unfair. And the best system that is in this process, I prefer what they call it, that is in a political science, the corporate pluralism, where people can cooperate and building the consensus as a substitute for competition and rivalry in dealing with the sensitive issues. Some issues about the identity issues, about how we can reconfigure the states, the issue about justice and reconciliation. All these are very sensitive issues. It needs some sort of a consensus. And I would like to see that as people advance forgiveness and advance the tolerance rather than vengeances, because the vengeances will take you just for the cycle and again to the vicious circle. If we don't like that corporate pluralism, we might be, the other ones is we could suggest what they call it, the public pluralism, where we could go with a multi-party system where the society allow for organizing and help organizing the marginal groups to come into the process. And there will be a bargaining always among the interest group to come out with an agreeable formula. In this case, the state role must be as a manager, organizing the political system and the decisions among the decision-making process, and make sure that is act as an arbitrator among those competing interests rather than become an instrument that is trying to shape and create social classes. The last one that is, I have, how many minutes I have? Okay, good. So, the other important thing that is, currently there is an opportunity for a dialogue. And this is, even though it was coming from al-Bashir, it doesn't mean that also anything coming from al-Bashir ought to be rejected. But I will call upon people to think about it twice and engage in the process and test the will of al-Bashir, how far he can go. Because it's giving windows of opportunity where people could talk and engage. And always you demand more. You get some rights, you demand for more, and you go to the next step. That tactics ought to be pursued. But if the stalemate is continue among the people in Khartoum, the way I was seeing it, it could be a setback. Because what will happen is, if al-Bashir found that there is no reciprocation from the other players, he could easily call the old guard that he get rid of it, especially Nafi Ali Nafi and the Vice President Ali Usman Mahmoud. This was sidelined now because they want to open the process. But if the process is going nowhere, these people might come back, and that would be a disaster for Sudan. Sudan might not going to exist if those people come back to the political process. So, the dialogue among the people of Sudan, this is the best way to go. This is the best way we can transform the states and restore the dignity for all the Sudanese people. And we want to see that is at least we could prevent the mischief of the Riverian and the quasi-Riverian experimentation for more than 60 years. The last thing that about the regional repercussion about this process is, one thing that the Sudan has made a mistake. And once you open up your process, the national issues, to the international system to play with it, international system will come in and add components, add elements that in the future it will become it will undo the whole process. And sometimes they'll come out with an easy way, shortcuts. Shortcuts that is, Southern Sudan and the North, you are not getting along, let's cut off South. And when they cut off the South, the regime was happy. The regime was happy because they could manage the Sudan. This is a smaller Sudan that could be governed now. South is gone. But now the problem is, that implosion that we have seen in Darfur, we have seen in Nuba Mountain, Blue Nile, and etc. Is just also a formula for separation if this struggle continues. And the regime doesn't pay attention. They want to exist. They want to survive, because the ICC has become problematic for al-Bashir. So al-Bashir wants to stay as long as possible, even if that means Sudan will disintegrate, he will stay a few more years out of prisons. So the international system, the indictment that is coming out, it never used as a tool to bring al-Bashir to indictment. It was used as a tool to weaken al-Bashir, to get more concessions out of him in South Sudan, and they did it. Now they want to get more concession of him on the other regions, and this will continue. And that's the game that everybody is struggled on. To me, the ICC issue should be put it aside. It's not relevant at all, given the amount of, the country will going through it, given the international pressure. So, international system should give a guarantees. There could be an observer to allow the process to go smoother, but not a place that they take the ownership. They take the ownership out of the hands of the Sudanese, and they put it on the hand of the institutions that tend to, at the end, undermine the whole process. So the issue of the Sudan is supposed to be discussed by the people of Sudan, and it should not be allowed. And at the end, I was saying that is, Sudan with its current potential of endowed resources, and combining with the right leadership and the right political will, they can achieve miracles. And I'm sure that Sudan will have a brighter future, and let us try and at least try a credible negotiations so that we can end this stalemate that is going on currently in Sudan, including South Sudan. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamid Ali, for your very clear presentation and for a very impassioned presentation, analysis, and suggestions for the way forward. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to my other friend, Dr. Ibrahim Noor, for another 15 to 20 minutes.
I will speak to what are the challenges that are facing possible peaceful settlement in the Sudan, following prolonged war in southern Sudan, and following also the recent conflicts, Darfur in 2023. A few days ago, I was reading in Shuruk daily about Algeria, and they had a very interesting title saying that in Algeria, the army has a state. Not the state has an army. Which I found it very interesting also. I could say in Sudan, or the northern Sudan now, or the existing Sudan, we have a party that owns both the state and the army. And in the South Sudan, we don't have a state. These are the serious challenges that are facing Sudan. And I will speak first to what caused the state collapse in Sudan. I focus on 4 interrelated issues. First, what I call the implosion of the immediate post-colonial state, leading to the erosion of the structural foundation of post-colonial social contracts that defined citizenship and identity. And this is a very important issue. The second, the political socio-economic terrains produced by such implosion. Because we speak about implosion, about war, civil wars, etc. But this kind of implosion is different. It does redefine the space, socio-economic terrains, and this different characterized by long conflict, identity, and ethnic war. And this is very important in understanding the nature of ethnic wars or wars based on identity. Darfur is a good example. Coming from the wrong part of Sudan, Rivera in Sudan, I would say the ascendancy of the Islamists was based essentially on using ethnicity in Darfur to ascend to power. Of course, then later the victim was the Darfurian population after the ascendancy of the Islamists. We do have generally a crisis of theorizing. We search for alternative tools. State building in the era of what we call compression of time and space. What kind of elements that are important in the state building. And finally, we have to contextualize all these readings in the context of Sudan. I'll start by the structural foundation of the immediate post-colonial Sudan, or state. We did have relatively stable subsistence with stable institutions, limited and manageable flows, and almost clear boundaries between the small niche of urban space and the vast ocean of rural space, mostly dominated by small-scale agriculture. But this kind of a structure faced an ultimate collapse. The ultimate collapse of the modernity project, marked by prolonged civil strife, brought the process of state collapse to its conclusion, producing many ungovernable flows and blurring the boundaries between the local and the national and the international. And this is very important. The collapsing state was neither able to maintain boundaries nor manage flows of people, transactions, and it could not also oversee the once visible internal, external linkages. The relevance of a state collapse thesis need to be situated in a broader context of failing structural support of the nascent statehood. Despite the obvious commonalities represented by the process of erosion of the weak structural foundation of the immediate post-colonial state, there are multiple forms of state breakup, corresponding to different initial conditions and multiplicity of forms of wealth production and surplus extraction. And if we are looking at this, I mean, we should look at the incidence of a state collapse. Incidence of a state collapse is not African. Remember the recent events in Yugoslavia or ex-Yugoslavia. Remember what happened in other places in that term. So we do have incidents of state collapse in different places. This brings me to my second theme, namely the political socioeconomic terrains produced by such implosion. This kind of terrain is characterized by prolonged conflict, identity, and ethnic wars. Ethnic wars are used as tools for ascendancy, for political ascendancy. But wars and prolonged conflicts are typical cases of chaos. Chaos is the theoretical conceptual framework that could make us understand how civil war produces different forms of state. Chaos produces unpredictable patterns, new dynamics of change in the society and economy, complete disruption of usual linearities. This is essentially the foundation of the chaos theory. And we are borrowing it. We don't have it in social science as usual. We are borrowing from our friends, scientists, who produce the chaos theory to explain the nature of climatic changes that are taking place. We'll speak about global warming. And this was the only theory that made us understand the unpredictability of patterns of climatic change, the new dynamics of change. And here we use new dynamics of change in society and in the economy, complete disruption of the usual linearities, a new form of social organizations and network. All these are produced by prolonged conflicts, and whether it's taking the ethnic color or taking any other color. War, and especially, as I would say, especially prolonged civil strife, produces a number of irreversibilities. Irreversibilities in the socio-economic structure and triggers the new dynamics for societal change. These irreversibilities are a direct result of abrupt and massive flows affecting not only population but also their institutions, their assets, and their skills. And this is very important in the understanding the challenges facing any country coming out of prolonged civil crisis or civil wars. We may, of course, mourn the old tools designed to measure both normalities and linearities, or alternatively, we look at the new situation as a paradigm shift, an attempt, as was already done in the meteorology, as I said, and in the mathematics of uncertainties, to develop a conceptual framework that can accommodate war-produced uncertainties. This kind of conceptual framework is very important in understanding what is the situation currently is. But I will focus. You still have 10 minutes. Oh, great. So I will focus on two issues. One, of course, how the state, following the collapse of the immediate post-colonial state, was captured by the snaky Islamists who started their creeping into power from 1983 during Numeri's time, the second military rule, allied with the military rule after opposing him, but they sneaked into the state apparatus. When they executed their coup d'etat in 30th of June 1989, they were already existing there within all state apparatus, including the internal security, including the army, including the police, etc. That was a very slow process. The Islamists called it a tamkin, strategiyyat al-tamkin, the enabling strategy, which were used by the a leader of the Islamists, Turabi, and he has a very interesting book on how he follows the Tamkeen policy. Tamkeen started by sending the Islamist cadre to oil-producing countries. At that time, they were friends. It was a different time in the 70s. And so that was part of the Tamkeen policy. Tamkeen started by finance, and then Tamkeen started by creeping within the state apparatus. The state in Sudan now is completely owned by the ruling Islamist party. That is a different state from the immediate post-colonial state. And therefore, the struggle in Sudan now against this kind of a state is similar, very similar, to the struggle of the Syrian opposition. I know this is a bit of disappointing and frightening, but it is true. It is true that the party, the ruling party, the Islamist ruling party, owns every part of the state, cleaned it completely from any potential opposition. And that's why the uprising that took place, last October, was completely smashed in more than 22 cities in northern Sudan. So you have a completely different regime that is Assad, and there are links between Assad and our Assad, if I can call him an Assad, in Khartoum. So we do have real challenges started by Shrouk saying Algeria, in Algeria the army has a state, and in Sudan the ruling party has a state and an army and security. And this is what is making the Arab Spring, or whatever you call it, in Syria, a real challenge. And that kind of regime can fight to the last until he finds some water tube to hide, as Gaddafi did. But it is true that this kind of regime is different. Yeah. Okay, the last 5 minutes I will spend it on where we don't have a state. And the issue of state building in South Sudan was further undermined relatively quickly. One possible reason for this could be that the referendum took place perhaps too quickly to allow for a transition and build-up of a state. It did not allow any transition to state build in the case of South Sudan, and many leading issues because of this referendum were shelved. Perhaps later became the slogan in the 2 years or in the 5 years before the referendum. No, now it's a question of establishing the South Sudan. So the issues very important, like the transformation of military movement into civilian movement, was never achieved, despite the fact that South Sudan always has two parties, two names, SPLA, SPLM. SPLA, the South People's Liberation Army, which means the military. What is SPLM? The South Sudan People's Liberation Movement, meaning that it's going to be the civilian party. Never became. Many central issues, including the creation of a land tenure system, was also shelved. Land tenure system was an essential part that can sustain peaceful coexistence between various ethnic groups and this was completely ignored, and so on and so on. While in Sudan, in Sudan, the current Sudan, we have a party, ruling party that owns the state, the army, and the security. In the south, we still have a liberation movement that is now fighting against possible partners and possible opposition group in the country. So we do have two conflicts facing the south and the north, and which is really undermining. And I have 5 minutes.
You have 2 minutes.
Yeah. Can I borrow 2 minutes more?
You can.
Yeah. So the last issue, the issue which could prevent effective creation of a peaceful framework is what I call that we live in the era of social, political, and perhaps ideological fatigue, and the absence of effective actors, because the structural foundation, I mean, Sudan used to have a very vibrant political movement. It's no longer, it is irrelevant. It's a structural foundation of the old political movements, parties, it's not there. And this is not Sudan only. Hamid spoke about party leaders being 80 on average, 80 years old, which is true for all the leading parties. They are 80 because there is no generation mobility except within the Islamist movement, which has a generation mobility. Funny enough, the Islamists have generation mobility, the left, extreme right, whatever, name it, and they have some kind of stagnation. So we don't have that. We have a history of vibrant political movement, but we don't have effective political movement. And that is an important part of the process of creating some peaceful coexistence. That, of course, is a commonality to all countries in the South, particularly in the Arab world and in Africa, where the old is dead, the new is not yet born. This is typically the Gramscian way of saying we are in a crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim Noor. I think my two friends here have said so many things, so I will try just to launch the discussion. I will try to bring up some of the, what I think are the extremely important points. Dr. Hamid Ali started from the very beginning by pointing out a major problem, which is the problem of the nation state. And he said this is a nation's, in plural, a nation's state, which in fact speaks a lot about the problem that at the very end, Dr. Ibrahim Noor raised, and I will say which is the problem that you raised at the very end. So Dr. Hamid spoke about the problem of the nation state. This is a problem very proper to Africa, but Dr. Ibrahim Noor said that it's not only a problem of Africa, it's also a problem in other continents and in other regions of the world, and I think this is very, very true. Dr. Hamid, in fact, also talked about center and periphery when he mentioned Riverian elites and non-Riverian populations. In fact, he was talking about the very well-known problem of center and periphery. And he said that the center had, as a subservient group, some adopted peripheral elites. So he painted to us a structure of center, subservient periphery, and periphery. Extremely interesting to me, and again, this is also a problem of underdevelopment, where the center tries to develop unsuccessfully, mostly, and the periphery is left behind. He also mentioned the problem of development. He said that at independence, most of the civil servants in Sudan, and by the way, civil servants in Sudan was very famous for being very capable at independence, but it was, of course, it was very small. And it was very small and populated by people of the center. It's again a problem of development. Education was concentrated in the center, and therefore this was reproducing underdevelopment of the periphery. How to govern Sudan? He suggested a federal system for Sudan. I guess to reflect the different nations, the different regions, the different concerns, and he emphasized some of the elements that should be prominent in rebuilding Sudan, such as in rebuilding Sudan peacefully, such as respect for human rights, such as what you called corporate pluralism, tolerance, and he emphasized not only federalism but also fiscal federalism in order, I guess, for resources to remain where they are generated. Finally, he mentioned something which is of great importance in developing countries, but in all countries, which is the weight of the international system. The international system, especially in developing countries, has a great impact. Developing countries are open societies generally, and therefore you have interference of the international system, and he emphasized that the question of the International Criminal Court should be left aside in order for the international system not to seize the opportunity it offers to extract more concessions from those groups ruling in Sudan. Dr. Ibrahim Noor started right away by saying that there was a problem of theorizing. There's a crisis of theorizing, meaning by that, at least I understand, that this means that there is a problem of interpretation, which are the parameters to analyze the problem of Sudan. And he mentioned something of extreme importance, which is state building in an era of globalization, in an era where time and space are compressed. I think this is not only a problem of state building, this is a problem of political system building and of regime building. And I think in the Arab region, we are faced with this problem in 2014. Like Dr. Hamid, he mentioned rural and urban spaces rather than riparian and non-riparian, as in center and periphery. He also mentioned urban and rural state, but he told us that the post-colonial state had collapsed. That the state that we see in Sudan nowadays is not the post-colonial state. That the post-colonial state has been conquered, has been occupied increasingly by Islamists using what he called the enabling strategy, strategiة التمكين. In fact, this reminds me of a Trotskyite strategy called, I know it only in French, la stratégie de l'entrisme, the entering strategy. You enter not only states in Trotskyism, you enter political parties. You try to occupy and conquer political parties by occupying the main positions in the party. So you mentioned the conquest of the state by Islamic forces. You also mentioned the question of the nation-state model at times of globalization. Yes, of course, the nation-states have been collapsing in Europe, Yugoslavia, but not only Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Union, and we have even examples in Western Europe. We have a referendum in September in Scotland, in November in Spain. So, in fact, the communications revolution, I think, is a problem for the maintenance of states which have tried to use the model of the nation state. Because I think that Dr. Hamid made a very interesting observation by saying nation of states. So in fact, we have many countries which have adopted the model of the nation state without being nation states. And I think we are in a region that is an example for that. You mentioned that the continuous, prolonged civil strife creates facts, irreversible facts, irreversible consequences for states and institutions. You finally said that you compared Sudan to Syria. You compared the political system that has been put in place by al-Bashir and his people to the political system that has been put in place by the Ba'ath in Syria, and you said that Sudan is facing the same problems of getting rid of the totalitarian system which has been put in place, totalitarian without being very effective in ruling, and this is quite a contradiction. You talked about problems of South Sudan. What I get out of that is that there has been no state building in South Sudan, that we are still living the period of liberation movement, that since the Naivasha agreement, time has been wasted. Rather than building the structures of a state, time was wasted, and we see this nowadays. Finally, you said that there were no political movements, no effective political movements in Sudan, and you said that this is proper to the South. I think it's not only the South. I think it's not only the South. I think political movements, political parties are in a crisis everywhere. Look at Southern Europe. Look at all of Southern Europe, the disaffection with regard to party systems, whether in Italy, in Spain, in France, in Greece, in Portugal. I think there is a real problem of political structures and of political parties. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I have taken so long in trying to bring up the very interesting, very important points that my two friends Hamid Ali and Ibrahim Noor have mentioned in their presentations. And with this, I promise you that I'll keep quiet, and the floor is yours. The floor is for the audience.
I read that my question is relevant to both speakers. Although that Dr. Noor has already touched upon this issue, my question is about the Arab Spring. So within the Arab Spring context, if the spring still exists in the first place, Sudan has positioned itself at the very beginning perfectly in 2011. But then suddenly it went down the hill. This momentum reached zero level in 2011. This is what we call the ruptured public uprising. Let me ask you, what's the fate and the destiny of the Sudanese public uprising, which is ruptured, as we will see, bearing in mind that it's this phenomenon, the ruptured uprising, is not only applicable to Sudan, but also applicable to other countries in the region, such as Algeria and Oman. So my question is, what's the fate of this ruptured public uprising in Sudan?
Second question? Yes, Imam.
Thanks for an interesting presentation to both speakers. My name is Iman Ahmed, and I'm from CMRS, and also I work at the Public Policy Administration Department as teaching assistant. Now, I have a question. I see that you've touched on the lack of political structures to drive change, and I wonder what your take is on the emerging forces that are actually driving the streets. The ones driving the uprising and the movements in the various cities are emerging groups of youth. Some of them believe in peaceful transformation that might not be very useful in the minds of those who believe in change using armed struggle and so on. But these people who are driving the streets, the young people, some of them lack the skills and the leadership skills, the knowledge to negotiate or maneuver in the political milieu of Sudan. I see these people, and I see some civil society organizations trying to provide them with some leadership training, advocacy skills, and so on. But all of that seems to have a glass ceiling set out by the very opposition that is represented by the two major parties, Al-Umma and Al-Ittihadi, which are the very traditional opposition in Sudan, and I believe that they are part of the problem. Do you ever think that these groups would be able to break that glass ceiling, and what would be an enabling environment for these people to be able to come to the forefront? Thank you.
Thank you very much. A third question before we give the floor. Yes, please.
Thank you for the first speaker, Dr. Hamid Ali, and second speaker, Ibrahim Al-Nur. That's my question. We are, as a young man, we keep listening since 1956 in Sudan about the history of the country, the problems. My point, and I have only two questions. The first question is, I hear from the Dr. Ibrahim Al-Nur, he said there is no a strong political effective movement in a country. The question is, what is the reason that there is no political effective movement in a country? The second question is, what is the vision and what is the solution for a country as a building for the new nation and for the next generation? This is my question, and thank you.
Thank you. We'll take this give three questions, and then we'll have another round.
Okay.
Yeah, because there is the issue of social and political fatigue, and let me explain that point. Thank you for bringing, first of all, the Trotskyite strategy. The Tamkini strategy also included penetrating political parties, which is very interesting. So the Islamists are learning a lot from the Trotskyites. And they have common language, too. They do talk to each other. I hope I'm not making a strong statement, but it is true. They followed the same strategy and penetrated all political parties. I agree completely with the three questions about what is happening. We do have, what do I mean by social and political fatigue? Sudan was the first country to overthrow a coup d'etat in 1964, October 1964. We did overthrow the first military regime by uprising, organized uprising. Trade unionists, young people, everybody was organized. Even the civil service were having their trade unions. 1985, overthrow of Nimeri was made possible because the army sided the uprising, but people were not so organized. And so the army was very helpful and sided the uprising against the military regime. So that Sudanese never called that Sawra. It was not a revolution, it was called Intifada. While the 1964, October 1964 was called revolution. So the 1985 was an uprising. Why I'm mentioning all these details? I'm saying that the capacity to organize has not collapsed, but almost the social structure which made possible the organization of people in political parties is no longer available. Trade unions, workers, etc. All these were fragmented through time, and therefore political parties based on organizing mass movement was not there. Young people are leading now the uprising in Sudan, but they are not affiliated to political parties. They are fragmented. They use the social media to talk to each other, but they are not organized. And when they had their uprising, they were smashed like hell with no support from any. And this is not a problem of Sudan. All of us, we know exactly young people are leading the uprising everywhere, but they don't become the leaders, which is a case where the political party cannot accommodate them, and at the same time they are not able to create their own political parties. That might explain what I call the era of political and social fatigue. Of course, I add to that, ideological fatigue is very important, especially for somebody in my age. We used to read a lot about other people. The uprising in Europe in 1967, we were in our schools, but we participated in that uprising. So it is not only the era of social media. At that time, we, without TV, without social media, we were also communicating because of some ideologies that were there. Now, where are these ideologies? Perhaps this could give some understanding, but most of the point about the youth capacity to organize is very interesting and very important to see.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamid.
I am just trying to fill the gaps that is Dr. Ibrahim has rightly answered. One thing that is regarding the glass ceiling and about the youth and the lack of experience, and they will try to be trained, but they are not getting, also they are reaching the optimization that they can go beyond. It's true that the change will come through the youth, but the political parties are the ones that will govern. So they will not going to govern, but they could trigger change. And probably people are very eager to see the change come up quicker. It took too long, but also in Sudan has a different dynamics, and that's related to this Arab Spring arguments. That is why the Arab Spring never come to Sudan. The thing is, the other societies, they preserve their energy. They were so quiet at the beginning, but they're boiling from the insides, and the energy was preserved and exploded in one time on coordinated efforts. In case of Sudan, the effort was popping out in different regions and in a violent forms. So the Darfur became the Darfur issue, South became a South issue, and the regime was good in dividing that tactics, saying this is the issue of Darfur, this is the issue of the Blue Nile, this is the issue of Eastern Sudan, this is the issue of the South Sudan. So any direction, it has its own problem, but they try to disjoint those issues, not to make it as a national issues. That has derailed the efforts and make people, and the regime was successful in tactics of division, and that's why it was delayed. But also the thing is, the regime has created its own tactics. The tactics of division that he created, the ethnic manipulation he created, that germ has now become contagious even to the ruling party, that they start fractured. And this is the one that is weakening them, and they felt that is, the core is start exploding from inside, and the regime is, especially the president, he felt that is, he's just now leaning towards the army. He has no clearly political party. He is depending only on the army. And I'm sure that the army also get the fatigue of the wars. So it's a chaotic situation, but hopefully the change is coming.
Thank you very much. Another round of questions. Dr. Allison.
Thank you, all three of you, for your very interesting interventions into a very important and very tragic but very common story. You've all pointed out very well that what has happened in Sudan is really not unique. In fact, it's almost commonplace if we look at the causes of civil war, particularly since the end of the Cold War. Because it's so common, the solution is also that you're proposing is also very common. What you have both addressed when you've talked about possible models is some sort of decentralized power sharing arrangement, where you come up with a negotiated framework in which individual areas have certain authorities that are devolved to them on the basis of an agreement, and usually backed up by some sort of international monitoring or some sort of international peacekeeping. And neither of you have addressed that, but I'm throwing it in there because most of the cases where power sharing has been successful, you've had, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's the former Yugoslavia, you've had heavy-handed third-party enforcement. If that is in fact the model that you're sort of suggesting, we have a problem in that we have a test case to a certain extent in Darfur with the agreements that brought UNAMIS and then later UNAMID. If we look at Darfur as a test case for this model, it has not been very successful. And so I would like your reflections on what have been the weaknesses in that arrangement that have prevented it from being sort of a test case for how the Sudan crisis could be resolved on a larger scale.
Thank you. Ambassador, others?
Thank you very much for both presentations. I would like to ask you if in both the case of South Sudan, where the international system had really a pivotal role in its coming to be, some people have even, colloquially stressed on how the United Nations was kind of the midwife for South Sudan independence. And on the other hand, you have the International Criminal Court indictment to a president as President al-Bashir. Do you see at this crossroad a point of change, a juncture in the international system in its role precisely in the issues that have come now much more bluntly in the case of Sudan, but as we've made very clear today, do not limit themselves to Sudan? Are we reaching the end? Are we still that, or there'll be more shortcuts, gains of time in ways the international system might remake things up? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ismail Yaqub, freelance interpreter. Thanks a lot for your presentation. It's very clear and it's very good for making this understanding for us. But as scholars, you are just analyzing, and this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the problem. But what are the solutions that you are providing as scholars? If you have any solutions. For example, Sudan is dismal failure since the beginning until now. It's very clear. It's very obvious. Everybody knows that, and everybody can see that. But what are the solutions? Are we thinking about solutions? Okay, this way we can solve the problem, or do you all use to just okay, this is the way it is. This is what's happening, and we don't know anything about it, and just keep silent or just keep thinking. Do we have any solutions? That's the question.
Thank you, Dr. Hamid, for you to start.
Regarding the question that raised by Dr. Allison about the cases of the third party that's supposed to intervene and providing assurances or premium, that is, whatever we agreed is going to be carried out. And it is true that in the case of, even you look at the Darfur thing, the UNIMED, or it was a failure because I had a meeting with the spokesperson of the UNIMED in Cairo here, and basically she said, on the UNIMED, we become a politician, we become a diplomat, we are not a peacekeeper anymore. Because what has happened, that is the mandates of the UNIMED, when they came in, they said UNIMED will be under the protection of the Sudanese government. So in other words, the government of Sudan has the upper hand, providing them the protection. And she was saying that is, the spokesperson saying that is, basically some UNIMED staff has been attacked and some peacekeeper was being killed, and they know who did it, and it was the government of Sudan, but they cannot say that. So basically they terrified, and the government of Sudan was very keen that the UNIMED will be on the hands of the Africans, not on the hands of the Europeans. And it will be easy, that is, you could easily corrupt them. I'm sorry to say that, but it is easy to corrupt them than corrupting the Europeans. And what has happened is the head of the peacekeeper become part of the political class of the ruling party in a way or another. They can attend their weddings, they could get perks, they could get privilege, they could get, and everyone, when they leave the country, the president will give them the highest honor. The highest honor for the peacekeeper that's supposed to be very neutral. So it's the failure because the structure of the force, it's the failure because of the mandate that they are giving to them, and the other thing is at the end, it became a rewarding system, it's paid very well, and every nation wants to keep that hard currency in a dirty way. So that's one of the things. Regarding about the international system that raised by the ambassador, it's a very, very difficult question. Whether in one way, international system could be a very good supportive. On the other hand, it could be a disaster. It will become a disaster when there are so many actors, so many stakeholders in that issue, especially when it comes with the commerce, and the business interest will be linked with the political outcomes. Then that will bring a disaster because the economic interest will take the precedent over the human suffering or any other issues, or whether the country will be disintegrated. Others, for the geopolitical reason, they think that the Sudan is too big. And it is easy that you can bring five states out of these states. And that's the way that is, probably it serves you well if you conquer them or if you divide them to 5, than having one entity to deal with it, because also strategically you don't want to see all the resources under the command of a bigger geographical entity rather than small pockets. So the international system will come with its own little agenda when it comes to this period, these countries, and the reputation of the country. Sudan has a bad reputation, bad record, and any recipe that you could suggest, it could be implemented. And I was having this meeting at the U.S. Institute of Peace with the group from the State Department. They are talking about Sudan. I have fellow Sudanese with me on that meeting, and one of them saying, yeah, these look like a very young kids. Why they are talking about Sudan? They don't know much about Sudan. I told them, be careful. These 2 young kids, they can break up the country very easily. So you got to deal with them. So that's also coming with the lack of knowledge, with the lack of experience. They read from the newspaper very quickly, configure the issue. They said, now I'm an expert in Sudan, and easily you'll find a person who will be an expert in 3 months, and he could give you a recipe.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. But, excuse me, Ibrahim, I think what you mentioned here is very interesting, but those experts who are 3 months, formed in 3 months. But you also mentioned the question of the African peacekeeping forces. You know, there only are African peacekeeping forces because the big countries do not want to send forces. So in fact, this is the failure of the international system. So the international system fails, in fact, the African continent, failed Sudan, lip service, and then it failed Sudan, and you have forces which are not trained. But then, how about the European peacekeeping forces in Srebrenica, in former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia? These were European peacekeeping forces. What has happened? They just witnessed a massacre. So there is a problem here of the international system, which should not only, for which Africans should not be faulted alone, I think. Right.
I don't have much to add. I mean, I fully agree with the two comments made by you and Hamid concerning the international system. Very interesting thing, for example, the Islamists in Khartoum are very skillful in their dealing with the international system. They handed over bin Laden, don't forget, while they are keeping their own policy inside the country. With the other people, they give them a lot of concessions, many. Bin Laden was only one concession. There were other concessions. They handed France cars. So they are clever. They know how to play the international system. Darfur is not a priority for the international system. It's obvious. It is, so it's not, you spoke about solutions. Yes, we did. We theorize too much because we don't have ready solution, but we have some vision of solutions. For example, the idea of a loose or very broadly based kind of confederation, which could be one way of solving, or what Hamid is calling the fiscal federation. I like the fiscal federation, although you have to make sure that poor regions are not treated equally if they don't have oil or if they don't have something. Of course, we need some kind of ability to create some effective social and political movement, because otherwise young people will rise, will die, and will go. And this is the experience of many of countries which witnessed uprising by young people, but it was never concluded. While they are there, it was concluded by other actors. And they make it as vague as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last round of questions.
Thank you, Professor. Concerning the close relationship between Egypt and Sudan, can Egypt make any difference in the condition in Sudan, interfering, perhaps mediating between parties, something like that, or it completely lost its role in the region? That's my question. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Here, please.
How far the Egyptian dimension interfere in the Sudanese political situation in old times in Mubarak regime and nowadays after the Arab Spring?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a good presentation. It's a really could be addition for us to solve our problem in Sudan. My question that, do you think that the religion, it has no relationship for the crisis in Sudan? All of you that you concentrated about the Islamic parties. My question, what's role of the other parties if the Islamic parties, they make crisis in Sudan, I would like to know that the role of other parties or Islam, it has a religion. Some of people, they say that the Islamic parties, they would like to impose the ideology of Islam in the way of controlling the country. That's why there is the crisis like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Rahim?
Well, you give me these are difficult questions. Egypt and Sudan, it depends which Egypt and which Sudan. At one point of time. Is it Morsi Egypt? Is it Nasser Egypt? And so on. So we know politics. I mean, the largest two political movement, Islamist movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, came out of Egypt. One went south, one stayed here. And these are the strongest and the oldest Muslim Brotherhood. So we do have a lot of links. It depends at what point of time, at what issue. There are issues that are national, are important for both countries. So they, despite political differences, they do negotiate them and discuss them. And we all know what happened during Mubarak time. And after the Arab Spring, we had a zigzagging relation depending on who is sitting where. I know, I spoke about other parties. Other parties are very weak. This is what I'm saying. I mean, non-Islamist parties, or parties that are not adopting an Islamic ideology, whether in the right or in the or to the left. I spoke about political fatigue. While for the Islamists, even when I said there is no generation mobility, I said within the Islamist movement there is a very clear Islamist generation mobility, unlike the other parties, including the left.
Thank you very much. Mohammed?
Regarding the relation between Egypt and Sudan, as rightly said Dr. Ibrahim Awad and Ibrahim Noor, always, whatever happened in Egypt, it got to penetrate and come to Sudan. And not only Islamic movements started in Egypt and went to Sudan, but also the Nasserists. When Jamal Abdel Nasser started confiscating properties and doing everything, the next day Sudan did the same thing, just following the same footage. And when you have a tomorrow here, some people say, we're going to do a tomorrow there in Sudan. And it's a copycatting of the things, it's continuing. But I always say that the relation between Sudan and Egypt like siblings. Sometimes there is no reason, but they see that they are creating issues, probably make the life interesting. But sometimes it doesn't make any sense regarding the media. They make things, comments that offending the others make it like two teams that are doing that stuff. But on the strategic issues, they will do very well, they cooperate very well in the strategic issues, even though in the other issues they could do even much better. So always, but right now with the current situation in Egypt is losing a lot of his glamour and a lot of his influence, and nobody will take it very seriously at this moment. So hopefully things will settle, and that will make it. Always say that be strong at home to be stronger abroad. So that's another issue. Regarding the political parties, it's true that ideology, people are not interested in ideologies. One time we do, but not now. People now interested in what's likely I could gain from this, rather than, I believe in something that I want to achieve it, whatever it is. So there's the fatigues on the ideologies, and it is not about whether Islamic parties or you could have a nationalist, fascist party that will govern. No difference from that, another radical Islamic party. The only thing is the difference. It's a far right and the far left. So probably people need to be on the center. You cannot reject your legacy. You cannot say that I'm going to get rid of the faith of the people and I will do something. It means you are engineering people. So probably you need to be more common sense in the middle and try to look for the common denominator that brings in people. And that's the way we want to govern, rather than governing one dimension.
Thank you very much. I think this has ended in a question of ideology and lack of ideologies. And let me just say a few words. I think that one of the problems of maintaining the nation state, right, and you may agree or differ, you may agree with it, is that ideology, whether liberal, Marxist, for that matter, socialist or Arabist, maintained the fiction of the nation state. Once ideology has collapsed, you have the primordial belongings which take over. You have the regional belongings which take over, the ethnic belongings which take over, linguistic belongings which take over. In fact, the disappearance of the integrating ideologies has made a lot for the disintegration of states. Look at Iraq. Look at Iraq in 2003 when William Bremer III started ruling Iraq. What he did is that he set up, what did he call it? A governing council on the basis of religious and ethnic belongings. He did not include socialism, Arabism, liberalism. It was only the sub-national belongings, the primordial belongings. It's no wonder that Iraq